Without Jani, there is no Warrant.
I could shoot myself in the head for writing that song.
I was absolutely convinced the police would find him lying in a pool of blood with a firearm nearby.
The guy's got a fucking stronger now tattoo across his spine.
While my musical hero, in the end, let his demons take him down. 2 years later, I got "I Saw Red" tattooed on my right forearm. Why? Lane's dead. I hope Jani knows that we didn't abandon him. Listen to the song and dance man, because that's what he was. Without anyone shouting, play Cherry Pie. Sometime in July of 2011, I found out that Warrant was going to be playing a concert with Skid Row on August 12th in Grand Forks, North Dakota, about 70 miles from where I live. I had no plans to go to that show. However, when Jani Lane died on August 11th of 2011, one day before that concert, I changed my mind. I went through a lot of emotions over the course of that day and the trip up to Grand Forks to watch that concert. I spent the next few days writing down my thoughts in an essay that I later submitted to sleazeRocks.com. In order to share my thoughts about Jani Lane here 12 years after his death, I wanted to go back and share what I put down in that article. That article was titled "Jani Lane, Warrant, and the Tribute That Wasn't." And I'll share that with you now. Please keep in mind that the thoughts that I share with you are 12 years old, but many of them remain as true now as they were when I wrote them. I am haunted by a YouTube clip of Jani Lane speaking in an interview about the absolute disdain he holds for the song Cherry Pie. In this video, Lane holds a plastic cup in his hand and is obviously wasted, but the seriousness in his voice is all too real.
And Jani and I called up and said, I don't hear the single. You gotta give me a single like Love in an Elevator. I need something like that. So that night I wrote Cherry Pie, sent it to him. He lived with it over the weekend, and all of a sudden the album's called Cherry Pie. The record's called Cherry Pie. I'm doing cherry pie eating contests. The single's Cherry Pie, right? If I'm lying, I'm dying. And my legacy's cherry pie. Everything about me is cherry pie. I'm a cherry pie guy. I could shoot myself in the head for writing that song.
When I heard Thursday night that Lane was dead, I was absolutely convinced the police would find him lying in a pool of blood with a firearm nearby. I want to share my thoughts with you about attending the Warrant concert the next night. But in order to do that, I need to tell you about my history with Jani Lane and Warrant. I may be the biggest Warrant fan alive. Okay. There might be some who worship at the altar of the Down Boys more than I, and yes, it's true that I don't always listen to hair metal these days. However, in my lifetime, I don't know if there is a band I've loved or defended more against unwarranted abuse than Jani Lane and his cronies. I even have 2 Warrant songs tattooed on my right arm, and one of them didn't come off the sacred 2, Cherry Pie or Dirty Rotten Filthy Stinkin' Rich. Hell, it didn't even come off Dog Eat Dog. I got my "I Saw Red" tattoo on my right forearm in 1993 after getting out of a heartbreaking relationship, and Stronger Now off of Ultraphobic on my right shoulder came later as I was trying to convince myself that everything was okay in my life, which it wasn't. I'm not the only fan with an obscure Warrant song tattoo. Jeff Fox, my brother in Warrant blood, has the title of the aforementioned Ultraphobic tattooed on his shoulder, and by his count, has seen Warrant or Jani live 31 times. Try finding two bigger fans than us. I dare you. Try me, and I may have to tell you that I bought 2 copies of Jani's Back Down to One album, which, for the record, wasn't even that good. Dog Eat Dog happens to be my favorite Warrant album. You can always identify a diehard because a diehard Warrant fan will never claim that one of those first 2 records are his or her favorite. Diehards love to explain how Dog Eat Dog, Ultraphobic, or to a lesser extent, Belly to Belly is, no shit, my favorite Warrant album. It was during the Ultraphobic and Belly to Belly years, of which many would say the darker leanings of those releases accelerated Warrant's fall from glam grace, that I really got my Warrant groove on. It seemed like every couple of months they were playing around Fargo or Minneapolis during that time, and Jeff and I, along with our buddies Dave and Chris, attempted to hit as many of those shows as possible. With me in Fargo and Jeff in Minneapolis, it's not as if we hit every show together, but generally, if you saw one guy shouting for family picnic, the other wasn't too far away. With our Warrant tattoos garnering us favor from the band, we ended up in places 2 fans that grew up in small town North Dakota could have never imagined. Backstage drinking beers with the boys, or on the bus having shots with Jani. Hell, I got pulled up on stage once so Jani could announce to everybody how much it meant to him that I had a Stronger Now tattoo.
You guys got a fucking Stronger Now tattoo, bro. Look at him, put the fucking spotlight. That's a man who is committed. That's a man. You have no fucking idea, folks, what that does to you. You write a fucking song, next thing you know, you see it on somebody's fucking arm. That means the fucking world to me, brother. Thank you very much. I'll tell you what, why don't you step up on the side of the stage? We're gonna get you fucked up, okay?
For 2 young fans such as us, these acts of kindness meant everything. While everyone knew that Cherry Pie and DRFSR paid the bills, it was obvious to the diehards that Jani really loved the other records more, even calling Stronger Now the best song he'd ever written at one point. During the Ultraphobic tours, Jani would plead with fans, practically begging them to listen to the new stuff. While the casual fans were shouting for Cherry Pie in between every song, as if there was a fucking chance it wouldn't be played, the diehards were hollering for Chameleon. Partially because we loved the song, and partially because we knew that Jani wanted us to love him for now, and not just for then. Sadly, Jani never got over his hatred of Cherry Pie and the good fortune it brought him. Now, I'm not suggesting that he would have lived a long musical life if he could have turned back the clock and not written Cherry Pie. I'm not saying he'd be a wealthy and healthy songwriter if his second release had been titled Uncle Tom's Cabin. On the contrary, Jani Lane had his demons, and they were visible to the world long before he and the boys sprayed down Bobby Brown with a fire hose. I think Jani Lane was going to be an alcoholic with or without the song Cherry Pie. However, I truly believe that the depression and shame he felt towards being the Cherry Pie guy only made his demons even more of a bitter pill, I know, to swallow. I got sober July 4th, 2004, about 2 months after I returned home from a 16-month tour in Iraq, where I'd been deployed as a member of the North Dakota Army National Guard. Believe it or not, as my sobriety took hold, I began to care less about Jani the musician and more about Jani the person. With sobriety, I began to look back at Jani's songs, and for the first time, I truly began to see how depressed he was, and how it was so readily apparent with each Warrant release post-Cherry Pie. Some people claim that Warrant was jumping on the grunge bandwagon with Dog Eat Dog and Ultraphobic and Belly to Belly because the music wasn't upbeat. Songs like Feels Good, Feeling This Bad, Room with a View, Andy Warhol Was Right Quicksand, and All My Bridges Are Burning definitely shared a level of darkness with grunge bands like Alice in Chains and Nirvana. But I don't think Jani wrote those songs because he thought it would bring him popularity. I think he wrote those songs because he was fucking miserable. Over the years, there would be prolific periods of sobriety and success. However, just as the diehards would begin to feel hopeful, another drunken setback would derail Jani. Many of us thought that the renewed interest from his reality career on VH1 would jumpstart his songwriting career. I wrote a review for Sleaze Rocks for the second Warrant reunion show from 2008, which finished with this paragraph. Who knows what will happen over the course of this summer's tour with Cinderella? Will Lane fall off the wagon? Will the old battles between bandmates resume? I have no clue. But on this night, they reminded us who the Down Boys really are. We all know what happened. In Las Vegas, Jani stumbled and mumbled through a show, and the rest of the band trudged on, barely able to contain their absolute disgust. I don't know why Jani fell apart so quickly, but now looking back at that review and that show, I remember quite vividly something that he said, and I'll paraphrase. Don't worry, we're not going to throw a bunch of new songs at you. We're here to play the songs you know and love. Jani made it 5 shows as an oldies act. I'm sure between every song of those 5 shows, all he heard was, play Cherry Pie. I'm not saying that made it okay to fall off the wagon and ruin the tour. My personal feeling is that he had an obligation and he should have honored it by staying sober, going on stage, and blowing away the fans with the songs he and the band had agreed to play. The thing is, with addiction, it's easier to stay clean if one is happy with his place in life. Jani obviously wasn't happy with what he was doing, and that gave him the excuse he needed to get loaded. Looking at clips of that Vegas show, I don't think anyone can blame the rest of the band for moving on. And they did. First came Jamie St. James. Now, let me say, I'm a huge St. James fan. I think Black and Blue put out some amazing songs, but his voice never fit with Warrant. To his credit, Jamie was a good frontman and he did the best he could, but going back to his previous band was a necessity. Next was current frontman Robert Mason. Now he can hit the notes, he's a hell of a showman, and has the best abs in rock this side of 1988 Bret Michaels. While the St. James Warrant release Born Again was, for me, a huge disappointment, I have to give the new disc, Rockaholic, propelled by Mason's powerful pipes, some credit. Life's a Song is a bona fide hit, if such a thing exists for a band like Warrant these days. And there are several other songs that I genuinely like. Warrant with Mason seems to be doing fairly well. While Warrant has been rolling along, the man who, let's be honest, gave them their career was weaving through the highs and lows. He sounded great singing Cold Blood with Kicks in California, and, from what is being said, filled in admirably for Jack Russell in Great White. Reports have been coming out that he has been recording, and there was a possibility of the long sought-after Jabberwocky project seeing a proper release, and hopefully that will still happen. However, there have also been canceled shows, the rumors about falling off the wagon, and reports lately that he'd been thrown out of hotels in California for trashing his rooms. And then Thursday night, August 11th, I get a text from a buddy. You online? No, I wasn't. Why? Lane's dead. A quick search of Twitter confirmed it. All the music sites were talking about how Jani had been found dead in a hotel. Word came back later that there was a bottle of vodka and prescription drugs found in the room. My 4-year-old son was crawling all over me while watching Spider-Man cartoons, and I sat there in shock, thinking how my first musical hero, whose words were scrolled up and down my arm, had died, alone, in a hotel room, like some junkie. My buddy Jeff, with the ultraphobic tattoo, wrote me, "This is a 38-year-old successful family man. Now, we haven't talked to each other in years, but as soon as I heard about Jani, I knew I'd hear from Jeff. Remember, this is my Warrant brother. I just wonder how alone he must have been in that hotel room that he couldn't reach out to anybody. Unless he called somebody, or unless he left a note, no one will know what Jani Lane was thinking before he died. No one will know if, as he picked up his room keys at the front desk that day, he was planning to take his life, or if he merely wanted a secluded place to get hammered without anyone there to bother him, without anyone shouting, 'Play cherry pie.' I hope it wasn't suicide. I haven't talked to Jani Lane in years, and chances are he wouldn't have known me from Adam unless he saw my tattoos. But it pains me to think he was in a place so dark that he felt his only option was to go to sleep forever." As I type this, I'm getting ready for my third year teaching high school English. Since I quit drinking upon my return from Iraq, my life has really started to move. I quit smoking in 2005, became an Army officer in 2006, and finished my master's in strategic leadership in 2011. I don't say that to brag because Lord knows I still have problems. I just wonder why I was able to put down the bottle and achieve some sort of stability while my musical hero, in the end, let his demons take him down. I was thinking about the lyrics from the song Undertow. Then the storm broke and the rain fell. Then the flood came, made the river swell. Then the dam broke, I just let it go. I was pulled down by the undertow. I remember walking into the bar at which I worked back in 1996, clutching my newly purchased copy of Belly to Belly. When I told a coworker I was looking forward to finishing my shift so I could listen to the new Warrant CD, she laughed. "Isn't that the Cherry Pie Band?" I explained to her that after all the things Warrant had done for me, after all the awesome concerts with my friends, after the songs I'd found so amazing I had to tattoo their titles on my arm, after the nights hanging on the tour bus, after all that, I would always buy every new release the day it came out, whether they were popular or not. I told her that after everything they'd done for me, there was no way I was going to abandon them. I hope Jani knows that we didn't abandon him. I hope he knows that he was so much more than cherry pie. Since he died, I've listened to Stronger Now about 10 times. He once said this was the best song he'd ever written, and I think the lyrics in his death probably hit home more than anything he ever wrote. I held you for a moment in my hands. The moment with you slipped away like sand through my fingers now. In front of me, a choice I have to make, to carry on or simply fade away. I lose you either way. I'd like to say that it was easy, but it was hard to say goodbye. I thought that I would die. Letting go of you was so hard to do. And I thought that it would kill me, but I made it through somehow. And I'm so much stronger now. Like a bird that's trapped inside a gilded cage, it's right to set it free, though it hurts to watch it fly away. When I finished telling my coworker why I was clutching a copy of Belly to Belly, she said, "You'd think you were talking about a family member." Well, in a way, I was. I hadn't originally planned to make the 65-mile trek on August 12th from Fargo to Grand Forks to see Warrant and Skid Row at The Betty, which is the name of the Betty Engelstad Center on the campus of the University of North Dakota. I'd seen Warrant a month prior in Fargo, and even as a huge fan of Skid Row, I wasn't sure I wanted to spend the cash on the drive and the ticket. Jani dying August 11th changed that, and my buddy Lee Elfson and I rolled out of Fargo at 4:30 p.m. for the 7:30 p.m. show. It's weird that as we left a beautiful day in Fargo, the clouds turned dark and the weather threatening the closer we got to the show. I did some reflecting on the trip. Thought about all of the Warrant concerts I'd seen throughout the years. How back in the day I thought it was the coolest thing in the world to get wasted with the Down Boys. And now, 7 years sober, I was going to see the band play tribute to the fallen Lane taken down by his own addictions. A report had surfaced during the day that before the song Heaven, Warrant would pay tribute to their former leader. Warrant was second on the bill, which would be headlined by Skid Row. But, at least for tonight, the main attraction wasn't the headline band. As we waited for Warrant to come out, I scanned the crowd, and at first glance I was disappointed with the turnout, but I think the size of the venue had something to do with it. It looks like the place would sit around 3,000, and the venue was maybe half full. Judas Priest was blasting through the speakers, the lights dimmed, and the Warrant guys made their way to the stage. As the opening notes of Sure Feels Good flowed through the crowd, I was curious as to how the band would look. Angry? Sad? Relieved? The answer was probably normal. I mean, what were they going to do? Cry? Let me interject here. Many of these old bands we love, including the two I was watching Friday night, are touring without their original members. Hell, there are 2 versions of LA Guns out there. This has many fans up in arms and calling for the original groups to get back together, usually under the guise of they should do it for the fans. However, after living in a tent in Iraq for 13 months at the beginning of the war in 2003 with the same group of people, I can now say I truly understand why these bands split up and cannot reconcile. We can all talk about how these bands should be all for one for all, and all that crap, but imagine being on the bus for 6 months with a coworker you cannot stand. Now, add to that the egos and the substance issues that often go with a rock and roll lifestyle, and I'm never surprised that these bands eventually called it a day. My point here is that even though the guys in Warrant owe their career to the songs Jani Lane crafted, it would not surprise me one bit if they hated his guts. I mean, if you look at the history, he left the band in the early 90s, has caused them to cancel tours, and had led them through numerous embarrassing shows, and that's just the shit we know happened. I can only imagine what went down on some of those bus trips when Jani was imbibing. That's not to say that the other guys are perfect and Lane was a wreck, but it's hard to argue that the other guys in the band weren't at least professionals who showed up every night prepared to play their instruments. As a fan, I love Jani Lane for giving me some amazing songs, and I can honestly say that having seen over 300 concerts in my lifetime, there is no one who, when on their game, was a better frontman than Jani Lane. But having had a drinking problem in the past, and knowing many who struggle with substances, I can safely say that living on a bus with a raging alcoholic would be a fucking nightmare. Enough bridges may have burned to the point that the other Down Boys didn't feel the need to shed tears. Now, back to the show. I'm not going to go into much detail about the songs. Sure Feels Good led into Big Talk and then Down Boys without any mention of Jani Lane. However, as Robert Mason pulled out his acoustic guitar, the audience seemed to sense that this was the moment we'd been waiting for. The crowd hushed and we readied ourselves for the Jani tribute. And it was bullshit. Not a funny joke. If you're a fan of the band, I'm assuming you've seen YouTube clips out there. No video, no audio, nothing more than Robert Mason talking about how Jani wrote some great songs and how much he loves singing them. None of the original members said a word. Okay, I'll try to give the band the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the logistics of a video tribute were too hard to coordinate on short notice. Maybe they were really having a hard time processing what happened. Maybe they did miss Jani. Maybe talking about him would have been too difficult. Maybe what I said doesn't apply to them and they were genuinely sad for their lost rock and roll brother. I really don't know. All I do know is that the Jani Lane tribute was one of the biggest musical letdowns I've ever experienced. Without Jani, there is no Warrant. I'm not trying to take away from the abilities of Jerry Dixon, Eric Turner, Joey Allen, or Stephen Sweet, or hell, even Robert Mason. They are talented guys, but the reality of the situation is that Warrant was playing to over 1,000 people in Grand Forks, North Dakota, 20 years after the release of Cherry Pie, because Jani Lane was the song and dance man. Even if they do hate him, he deserved better than what he got. Heaven ended with a crowd chanting, "Jani, Jani." And with that, the moment passed. Heaven led it to a new song, "Sex Ain't Love," to be followed by "So Damn Pretty," "Dirty, Rotten, Filthy, Stinking Rich," "Sometimes She Cries," "Life's a Song," "Machine Gun," and finally into the most difficult song of the night, "I Saw Red." At least difficult for me. I remember driving around with a friend in Bismarck, North Dakota in 1990, just after picking up the Cherry Pie cassette. Remember those? At the local music store. Remember those? And being anxious to hear the song Jani had been pumping up in Metal Edge magazine. I was 18 years old and was still suffering from a broken heart. And as I sat there listening to this song, it was as if Jani was describing exactly what I'd been through and exactly how I felt. 18 years old, middle of the day, hanging with my buddy, and there I sat, tears streaming down my eyes. 2 years later, I got "I Saw Red" tattooed on my right forearm. Mr. Rainmaker was next, followed by "The Last Straw," "Uncle Tom's Cabin," and that's when Eric said it was time for dessert. The crowd went wild for Cherry Pie, and that's fine. I left my seat and walked around. After everything that had happened, I just could not listen to that song again, at least on that night. Personally, I think the best tribute would have been not playing it, but I understand why they had to. I don't want to sound jaded to the guys in Warrant. They put on a great show. I may talk about Jani a lot, but the other guys in the band have been great to me over the years as well. I interviewed both Eric and Joey for my college newspaper, and back in the 90s, I drank and chatted with every member of the band. A special shout out to former drummer Bobby Borg, who was easily the kindest and most accommodating Warrant member of all time. And they were always cool. I hope they continue making music and touring as Warrant for years to come. Regardless of who is in the band, I'm telling you, I'll still buy the new releases the day they come out. But at this time, I can't think of Warrant without thinking about Jani Lane. Go back and listen to all of the Warrant records. Listen to "High," "Andy Warhol Was Right," "I Saw Red," "Mr. Rainmaker," "Letter to a Friend." Listen to the song and dance man, because that's what he was. Listen closely to "Stronger Now" and tell me that Jani Lane wasn't an amazing songwriter. His legacy may be Cherry Pie, but his talent was anything but. Here's to you, brother. Thanks for the songs, and thanks for the memories. 12 years later, since the day you passed away, I still haven't forgotten.